Hello, I'm Marshall Pennick, and in this presentation I will be taking you through several of the works that we have examined in this course. Mark Twain's Huckleberry Finn, Frederick Douglass's autobiography recounting his years as a slave, and several of Nathaniel Hawthorne's short stories comprise the first half of this presentation. Each of these authors takes on what I consider to be truly substantial themes. Their works aren't just exercises in creativity or introspection. They present arguments about what each author perceived to be a societal ill in need of understanding and rectification, or, as is the case with Hawthorne, a scholarly critique of a historical wrongdoing to which the author felt a personal connection. The second half of this presentation will cover the poems of Emily Dickinson, Walt Whitman's Leaves of Grass, and On the Road by Jack Kerouac. These works have been separated from the rest due to what I perceive to be their less substantial content. Sal Paradise and his companions may represent the struggles of lost souls of the Beat Generation, but I personally had a hard time empathizing with either him or his companions, except for those that are betrayed or abandoned by Sal in his flight of fancy across the United States. Emily Dickinson's entirely internal focus lost my interest fairly quickly as well, given the almost neurotic nature of some of the poems. While Walt Whitman's poems convey an overly idealized vision of humanity, the authors covered in the first half of this presentation used their writings to criticize social ills, provide a scholarly critique of a historical wrong. Dickinson, Whitman, and Kerouac are based in the abstract, have a more personal and introspective focus. Mark Twain and Frederick Douglass each cast a critical eye on the peculiar institution of the American South, chattel slavery. Both men found the institution abhorrent and used their writings to criticize the practice. However, they went about this in starkly different ways, each conditioned by their own experiences. Their writings showcase this clearly. Frederick Douglass gives a far more visceral, and in some ways more powerful, critique of slavery through the use of his own years spent as a slave in Maryland. For Douglass, slavery was a very personal topic, one that had impacted him in a very real and tangible way, as he was, in fact, a slave. This feeling of raw, personal experience is conveyed through his writing and narrative of the life of Frederick Douglass, an American slave, making his criticism all the more powerful for the emotional weight that it carries. Douglass takes the reader on a tour of his youth, using personal anecdotes to demonstrate the pernicious effects of slavery not just on the slave, but also upon the slaveholder. The Aulds, his masters during his time in Baltimore, are initially kind and loving, especially the wife, who begins to teach Douglass how to read and write, despite it being against both custom and law to educate slaves. This initial benevolence doesn't last long, and soon she too begins to exhibit the cruelty and malice demonstrated by his earlier masters and their overseers. Mark Twain, for his part, born with the luxury of a white skin in 19th century America, lacked the searing personal anecdotes that Douglass uses to such good effect in his autobiography. In their stead, he uses a subtle humor to make his criticism, in the form of ironic and blatantly racist statements by the protagonist, Huck Finn. When Huck describes his remorse for helping Jim escape, for the harm that it causes Jim's master, the reader is being invited to look beyond the conventional view of the time and recognize the folly of lamenting that one helped another human being escape slavery. What at first appears to be simple racist comedy of the sort common in his era is in reality a tongue-in-cheek criticism of the institution. Like Twain and Douglass, Hawthorne uses his works to provide a critique of a social ill. He differs from the first two, however, in that his critique of Puritanism is of a more scholarly sort, enjoying the benefit of the passage of time and the accompanying benefits of hindsight. Taking as his subject the New England Puritans of the 17th and early 18th centuries, Hawthorne uses his short stories to critique what he paints as the many hypocritical and corrupt practices that marred the Puritan faith. In this, his is more of a scholarly critique of a historical wrong, written after extensive research and study, rather than a societal critique and a call for justice, as is the case with Mark Twain and Frederick Douglass. By Hawthorne's time, Puritanism had moderated substantially, almost a century and a half having passed since the Halfway Covenant of 1662 moderated the faith. The works discussed in the first half of this presentation all took as their focus serious social issues, using their works to level criticisms in an articulate and creative way. Those discussed in this half are more abstract, taking an abstract and personally introspective personal focus. In On the Road, the reader is taken on a journey across the United States, with the story's angsty and neurotic protagonist, Sal Paradise. Sal, to put it bluntly, is a terrible person. He picks up jobs such as cotton picking because he has romanticized the concept of manual labor. Only upon actually participating in it, he discovers that it's not quite so great after all, when one is expected to do it day after day. He routinely abandons the people he meets along his trip, establishing what he describes at great length as profound relationships, only to get bored shortly thereafter and leave for his next caper, such as riding on the back of a flatbed semi, or hearing from his friends that they are similarly inept, and through their tales of temporary jobs as incompetent night watchmen. On the Road is heralded as the great novel of the Beat Generation, a group of lost and disenchanted young authors who felt themselves disconnected from the America of the 1940s and 50s. Sal is meant to convey this sense of restlessness and a feeling of not fitting in, and in this it does succeed. However, while he serves to convey that message, Sal and his companions also come across as entitled, whiny, and shallow. The result of this is that there are few, if any, people of substance who could find a Sal a sympathetic or likable character, which interferes with the message of the book. Overshadowed by the inherent unlikability of the protagonist and his friends, it can seem that there is no overarching point to the novel, just a story of a lost young man wandering his country. Continuing in the vein of romanticization, we now move on to Walt Whitman and his collection of poems and leaves of grass. Unlike Sal in On the Road, however, Whitman actually idealizes things that are more readily understandable. He glorifies the natural world, the frontier lifestyle, the craftsman, and the tradesman. There are even several sections devoted to a ferocious naval battle, implied to be one of those waged by John Paul Jones during the Revolutionary War. While those things Whitman romanticizes are inherently more noble than those given the treatment by Kerouac, the poem remains divorced from reality and is a celebration of the abstract. Last set of works to be covered here, those of Emily Dickinson, are on the whole highly introspective and focused on different emotions experienced by the poem's narrator. There's nothing wrong with this. However, it lacks the power of the critiques of Twain and Douglas, as well as the detailed descriptions and narratives of Whitman and Kerouac. Thank you for listening. Have a great day.